Hello and welcome to my presentation about improved schools of the future. My name is Brian Forbes, and in this short video I'll be going through different elements of what a school of the future might look like, what are the different elements inside the school, details about students and curriculum, and especially the integration of elements such as technology. So when we're talking about schools, really some of the things that come to mind, really we think of, long corridors and classrooms with desks all facing the same direction, usually a teacher in the front of the room who's lecturing or writing on a board, and students performing tasks, especially taking tests with the increase of standardized exams. The thing about all of these elements of the way traditional schools function is that it really doesn't work for our kids, especially in a modern society. Within the 21st century, the way that our lives are structured outside of school don't really match what we do when we're in school. So modern schools need to take this and find ways to change things. And so the things that we need to change include elements such as the physical space of the building, the way in which we group students and teachers both, how do we use technology not only as tools or replacements for what we already do, but how can we utilize them to become producers, and then also how do we get greater community involvement. So the first thing we want to look at then is just going to be the physical space of the building. Most people would talk about physical space as we need rooms where the kids can be, where we have 25, 30 kids in a room, where there's a teacher who's responsible for just those kids during that class period. But we know that that's not necessarily the best use of space, especially for the types of things that we want to teach our kids today. The problem we start running into is, even though it seems like it's the easiest thing to fix, well, if traditional classrooms, the size and shape don't work, then we need to change them. But the problem with that is it becomes the most difficult thing to change because it costs money. And we run into issues of where do we get that money from and who's going to pay for it. While I don't really have all the answers as far as that's concerned, I just want to address some of the things about physical space of the building that we want to change. And the first is accessibility. If we practice what we preach, then we want to make sure that the building is welcoming and accessible to all students, especially those with disabilities or other issues that would need to access the building. Even community members who come in when they come for sporting events or open house night or back to school night or parent-teacher conferences, we need everyone to be able to have equal access to the building. And that could include things like having ramps in addition to stairs. It could be elevators. It could be braille maps. It could be other signs on the building and things that help allow people to come in the building and then navigate and just access the campus in general. But when we start looking at the actual space for students, we really need some flexible spacing, and that's for the students. We need these flexible spaces because kids aren't always needing to be in a desk facing the front to a lecturer. They need to be able to collaborate. They need to be able to study independently. They need to be able to get up on a whiteboard on their own, or they need to have a quiet place to study. And all of these different kinds of spaces aren't traditionally available in what we think of classrooms today. So we need to find ways to give those to students. Another thing besides flexible spaces is just student spaces in general. Right now, most schools only have one student space. Sometimes they call it a commons, sometimes they call it a lunchroom, but really that's the only place for students to congregate and to interact with each other. Well, if we look at restructuring schools, then we can find spaces for kids to have those study spaces and those workspaces and also recreational spaces that they can best use to kind of wind down and relax and then refocus as they're working through problems throughout the day. Something else we might consider is also teaching spaces. That kind of goes with our flexible space a little bit, in the sense that teachers don't always need to be lecturing either. We need spaces where we can work with small groups, or we can get kids on technology while other kids are working in a maker space, while some kids are researching with books or online. So if we have different kids doing different things depending on extension activities or PBL, project-based learning, then the teacher also needs spaces to take kids to show them things and do things that are outside the realm of the traditional stand and lecture style. Now, when we start moving outside of the physical space, we can also start thinking of issues such as grouping of students. Now, when we talk about grouping, we're really talking about how do we determine the way that students are assigned to classes and teachers to subjects. Most grouping right now is very basic. It goes from when you hit a certain age, you enter kindergarten, and then we work your way up. Every year you move from first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way up to graduation. And we know that passing kids along just because of their age isn't really an effective use of grouping. So here you can see an image of the way we do things now, and we need to move from this. We need to go from, look, hey, I'm 8 years old, I'm now in the third grade. We need to move away from that and start moving into a system where we group students by proficiency. And a part of that change is going to require us to change the way we have report cards. Instead of just having a letter grade per class, we need to start looking at a standards-based report card that allows students to have a record of mastery of different standards, and then we can put kids in different groupings based on the standards that they have or haven't mastered and what kind of remediation they need, and that needs to be a very fluent ability for administration and teachers to do that for students. And that also leads us into the next thing, which is about open scheduling. On the left here, we have a very traditional schedule where we have a student who has a list of courses and the times they have to be there. But instead, if students could take some extra ownership, and especially with guidance, with guidance counselors and coordinating teachers, they could say, well, look, these are the standards I haven't mastered. And then we have kind of a catalog or a calendar for the day that says, for the day, for the week, for the month, these are the teachers that are teaching those standards at staggered times. And then students could take it upon themselves to attend certain classes to get the work and meet those standards and pass assessments and other things and complete projects that show mastery of standards, so that they can then get those updated on their forms, and then they can be moved along and then attend the next session with that teacher to move on to the next standard. Something else we could think about too is trying to build in tier and extension times. Now, I know in my building, for instance, we have some tier and extension times built in, but those are more for like extreme tiered cases like tier 3, but tier 2 and even just implementing tier 1 is sometimes a challenge. So if we found in an open scheduling time that we tell certain students, hey, look, you have to attend so many tier sessions for this amount of time throughout the week, and then let the students choose, that way they're not only getting a choice, but they're also getting to make sure that they don't miss out on certain standards because they're pulled from classrooms. So that's kind of the grouping end. Now, next we can move on to technology. With technology, we need to rely on it more here in the schools, not just because instead of handwriting, we need to teach kids to type. We're just replacing things then. But what we need to start moving to is finding ways for kids to interact with our material and then produce something at the end so that they can more closely resemble what happens in the real world. Part of that can happen through virtual reality. Technology allows us to go from relying on a teacher in the front of the room all the time to being able to communicate with people halfway around the world. That could be a teacher at a university, a teacher from another school in a different country. It could be talking to your local museum where somebody is Skyping in with you and talking about information and leading a course or an activity. But we need to utilize all of these things to kind of expose our kids to people outside of the traditional school. Next, we need to rely more on learning management systems. And when I say rely, I don't mean like it does all the work for our teachers, but instead what I mean is that learning management systems enables us to do way more inside and outside the building with tracking of students and data and making sure that they're reaching their goals than we could ever have done with a traditional grade book like you see on the left. So learning management systems are going to enable us to deliver content, allow students to communicate and collaborate with each other, with teachers and administrators, and also for us to keep better data on assessments to understand when a student has mastered a standard. Another thing to look at too, for especially the graduation requirements for high school students or even middle school students to pass along to high school, would be e-portfolios. Traditionally, kids get their work, they throw it away, they recycle it, they shove it in a binder, and you never see it again. But if we have kids start doing more things electronically, scanning certain papers, taking pictures and video recording themselves, performing certain actions, then they can post all those things so that when they go to high school and they go to college applications or they try to get a job, they can show people what actual skills they have and then examples of what those skills are and how they've utilized them in the past. Now, this a part of that portfolio process and just the idea of using technology and other elements would be allowing students to become producers of material. And that also occurs through PBL or project-based learning. So instead of having kids fill out multiple choice questions, short answer, word bank, connect the dots, whatever you want to call it, we need to have students actually taking ownership of not what they know, but what they can do with what they know. So for instance, as you see on the right, we have a group of students who created a project based on a series of standards so that they could show that they understood those standards. And then they present that information, and then teachers could use rubrics to score them and give feedback, and that would be much more meaningful than just checking a bunch of boxes on a test. And the next thing we think about is community involvement. With community involvement, we need, that old saying that, it takes a village to raise a kid. Well, this is the same thing. We need everybody to play a role in public education. Something we could look at, even as early as middle school, but especially high school, is trying to include some internships. We need to get away from just talking about what careers are and getting kids some real-world experience about what those are. So we learn the standards in the classroom. They go and they see how those work in the real world, and then through their internships, they gain that experience that allows them to be more career ready and successful after high school. And also sponsored activities. We need to make more sponsorships and connections with museums, planetariums, zoos, and other things, even corporate sponsors that can come in and show us, like, what does the oil field look like? What does engineering look like? Electricians and those things. They need to be able to come in and talk to us about how math and science and history and all those things relate to activities outside just normal paper and pencil assignments. And then councils. We need to bring the community in. It's not enough anymore for us to just post things on our website and hope that people in the community read it. We need to take a more active role of getting people in the building so that they can then get a say and help us plan on what the future of our school looks like and where do we go from here. And then student shadowing. It's kind of the opposite of internships. We need to be inviting parents and community members into our building to shadow our students, to go and to act as a student themselves, to go from room to room and see what our students are doing on a daily basis. Not because we're necessarily trying to catch students in the act of doing something wrong and we hope their mom and dad see it, but because we know that if parents are more involved and they have a better understanding of what their kids are doing and what expectations are, then those expectations are reinforced at home. And that's going to allow us to ensure that students are maximizing their potential inside and outside of school to get the best education that we can give them. Now, all of these things that I mentioned are just a few things to consider. Really, we could talk more about like how to implement social media aspects, how to have increased transparency with the community and parents and teachers, to create partner schools for tech classes and career courses, and to offer programs that we can't offer here because of budget cuts and things. And then also how to revise graduation requirements instead of going for what grades have you attended, and did you take 4 math classes in a row, and were these the ones? When we look back at things like replacing report cards with standards-based cards, all of those things would allow students that are able to graduate early, and then they'll eliminate the stigma attached to kids who need more time to graduate. So restructuring all these things would just increase, the interest, the engagement of students, the usefulness and the more effective budgeting and things like that for teaching and staff members, and the creation of building and the use of space, and also modernizing education. That is the problem, is that education in general has just been stuck in the past, and we need to find ways to move it into the future. So, all right, thank you for taking the time to watch this, and I hope you guys agree and learn something, and I look forward to watching everyone else's videos as well.